No one who took the subway on the morning of the 20th of March 1995 expected to be the victim of a terrorist attack. On that initially ordinary Monday, 8 people died and 2,000 more were injured at the hands of a mysterious aggressor. It wasn't the first time that the murder weapon, sarin gas, had been used on Japanese territory. A year earlier, a similar attack struck Matsumoto City, and it could very well happen again. But how could anyone get their hands on such scarce resources? And more importantly, what reason in the world could justify such relentless manslaughter? The average person would hardly suspect Om Shrinkyo. On the surface, a Buddhist sect that sold yoga classes and pseudoscientific magazines, this group had for years been tracing a path of destruction that wouldn't be fully discovered until the height of its violence. However, every crime leaves stains. Since the previous decade, professionals had been carefully observing the cult's activities and warning the media that soon the madness that was taking hold of the group would affect more than the followers and their desperate relatives. That's how, 2 days after the subway attack, Om had their headquarters raided. No matter how much the sect tried to deflect the accusations and claim that they were only trying to build a Buddhist utopia, now all eyes turned to the world of Om. It wouldn't be long that a variety of sting operations across multiple years would follow suit, and soon lead to a heavy destabilization of the group, which would eventually lead it to split into 2 different factions. In 2007, Om Shrinko would turn into both Aleph and Hikari no Wa. After this split, a lot of information would get spread on the internet from either members who defected or had moved to different groups. A lot of it was inconsequential, insignificant, but the other parts turned out to be some of the strangest, most convoluted propaganda I have ever laid my eyes on, including several anime-style movies. Today we'll be talking about that time a cult made their own anime. This essay argues that Om translated that real-world terror they were spreading into a strange sort of cinematic weapon, using film and animation as a kind of spiritual technology designed to induce trance and recruit those who were vulnerable. The works I'm going to examine today fall into 2 types. The first is an anthology, often circulated under titles like My Truth Practice Diary, made up of short confessionals dramatizing life before and after joining Om. The second are long-form movies, either documentarian, prayer-shaped films that blend live-action footage, chanting, and symbolic animation to manufacture the feeling of the sacred or straight-up animated parodies of certain popular things in Japan at the time. Both aim for the same results, to Pavlov the viewer into joining the cult. The anthology's episodes follow a tight template, which we will examine by going into it and its themes. It begins with the main character of its respective story mentioning being around the age of 17, perhaps a memory from the past that he wants to present us, nothing more or nothing less. As he begins his dialogue, something feels odd. I don't and cannot quite hear a man simply recalling his past. He speaks just like someone who's been utterly brainwashed. Before he even goes into that, he talks about the fact he has become a doctor, owns a sports car, and has married a beautiful wife. He first sort of flexes his wealth on us before starting his monologue, where he mentions that when he was 17 he had separate goals. It is in this voice of his that I hear someone creating a version of it that fits the arc of his transformation. He talks about his passions when he was 17, like karate, rafting, video games, soccer, jazz, driving, pachinko, and mahjong. I can't confirm exactly, maybe they are talking about the passions of people their age, but no, they are his. He's doing something very deliberate. He's trying to prove that everything outside religion and work is sinful. Not directly, but it's useless. No matter how harmless, even nostalgic this may appear, there's something strange in the way the interests are recited. They feel like bullet points, as if he's reading them off a resume or a list. There's no emotion tied to them, no specificity. It's not like he's saying, I remember the sound of jazz through my window, it's jazz. Despite how innocuous this may seem, there's something off in his recital of them, as if he were keeping tabs on a list. Robotic and cold in that sense, without much desire to specify and make them unique, reducing it to a singular point and nothing more pronounced. And another disturbing thing is that he puts pachinko, gambling, on the same level as video games or soccer, or on anything else for that matter. It's as if he's telling us directly gambling is as bad as any team sport, any video game, anything that isn't religion or work. Anything outside the routine as such is bad. This flatness and emotional distance can be felt throughout every single story that is part of the anthology. It's people recounting entering a sort of routine, lying for their betterment. It very clearly shows a life already slipping into nothingness, sorted into categories in the strangest ways and laid out to a confused, easily impressible viewer. The language is empty because the speaker has become hollow. The very act of remembering is now performed in service of the cult's narrative. Ambivalence, no doubt a work to perpetuate the cult's narrative, reverberates through the anthology, reducing rhyme to monotonous rhythm, lying for their motives, a slow decay into nothingness sorted into the strangest categories, hoping for their obfuscation and working towards coercion of the reader. A hollow sort of language. He becomes a doctor, he buys a sport car, he drives to the beach. These are all undeniable signs of success, but there's no joy in them. Instead, the story inserts a silent unease, almost as if the external world, all the money, the cars and the relationships has already failed to satisfy something deeper. He stares into the distance, the horizon. He drives alone. I think this moment is happier than any of the other accomplishments, or maybe it's how he got there in the first place. That feels separated from the existence he now lives, and the dissatisfaction becomes a kind of way to silently allow each act that hollows. We're intentionally shown the good parts at the beginning, but something is very clearly off. Although leading a life of material success, he lacks joy, and instead the story is infested with a sickly silence, whispering of dissatisfaction and reeking of callousness. In the stillness, he stares out horizons, inwards towards himself. These solitary moments feel happier than any of his prospects, or maybe the path he took towards them separated his waking self from his living self. Whatever the case, that sickness lingers, and even though the best parts were shown first, the stench looms in foreboding ways. When he stumbles upon the book titled Beyond Life and Death, he acts like it's not just a coincidence, but a way of divine intervention pulling him extrinsically towards an inanimate faraway goal. It is his moment of calling, but not in any divine sense like he would wish for it to be. It's the film's seduction of the spirit, a deepening of a voice that is unheard to me, to you, or to any of us. We're not even told what the contents of the book are, it's only described by its effect. He simply cannot stop thinking about it. What are the contents of such book? Did he even read it? Or is it just the fact the subject is complex? Is that what pushes him onwards? The act of thinking is interrupted and replaced with his obsession? This is how his spiritual hunger is redirected into an unhealthy spiral. I find it is important to slow down here, because the shift in his schedule that follows is not just a sign of dedication, it's his body and mind's total surrender to an abstract. From 6 am to 2 am, no moments are unaccounted for. His body still exists, but his interior life is being overeaten. It's basically torture. Into that void formed and dug out by this routine, he reads books about the underground Samdi, a ritual in which members were literally buried alive, stripped of food and water to meditate in total sensory deprivation. In theory, this is meant to accelerate transcendence by conquering the most basic physical needs. One would supposedly break all attachment to the flesh and attain deeper insight. In practice, it became yet another tool of control. Imagine lying in darkness, pressed beneath the earth, unable to move or eat for days on end. Any emergent clarity is useless in the grasp for air or for food or any other needs. Some insiders claim food was secretly provided, suggesting the whole ordeal was less about enlightenment and more about breaking down the will to resist, a sort of fear tactic to make them go into it in the first place. Philosophically, this perverts the classic Buddhist Samdi, the Samdi was traditionally a peaceful state of concentrated mind achieved through careful practice. But this cult turns it into a form of torture hidden under the agenda of salvation. Whenever the characters start speaking and talking about how they've achieved their goals, each story in the anthology talks about light inside. Another lie which was propagated among cult members. A thinly veiled hallucination induced by deprivation and fear. It isn't true spiritual awakening. The repetition of breathing, standing, meditating and eating at fixed times is just like regular religious discipline, but the pacing is brutal. Sleep is optional, and what begins as yoga, which is something totally healthy and normal, an act associated in the West with wellness or peace, is weaponized into something soul-rendering, even mechanical, null, knotted colors, devoid of soul and terribly metallic, sharp in contrast to life's gentle flesh. Pranayama, mantra, and mudras are practiced in suffocating blocks, and yet the character smiles. He says he feels a light inside him. This is where I pause, because what the fuck does it mean to feel a light inside you when your entire personhood has been dissolved into routine? Is it a joke this movie's been playing on us? Did they really expect members to torture themselves and sleep 2 hours a night? Is this enlightenment, or is it submission mistaken for peace? It's like the film itself is directly messing with us by avoiding giving a clear answer, because it doesn't want us to question it. But I do question it. Why wouldn't I question an obscure cult film? I see in that light the early stages of ego death, manufactured by induced deprivation. This was a core tactic used by strip the self of all external identity and replace it with the truth revealed by the guru. Shoko Asahara promoted this annihilation of self as a necessary step towards transcendence, but in practice it created a vacuum, one built on obedience, fear and delusion. When the protagonist dreams of Asahara, it really doesn't feel like the movie is being any bit subtle. The live-action footage breaks the animated form, turning a hole in the illusion. It's not poetic, neither soulful. It feels like an intrusion of the supernatural. Imagine how you would feel if a giant bearded cult leader invaded your dreams. Actually, some of you might be into that stuff, but leaving that aside. Either way, Asahara is not a spiritual ideal, but a damn ghost that watches in each single one of the stories in this movie. The dream isn't ecstatic or transcendent, it's honestly quite eerie and is presented without commentary, as though the viewer is supposed to accept it as normal. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of the film. It doesn't try to persuade you, it shows devotion as fact, as if all questions have already been answered. But in reality, the questions haven't even been allowed to form. Right after the dream sequence ends, the art style changes to a more simplified, cheaper animation that follows the dream. Most likely due to the budget constraints, but I see it as a sort of ironic and symbolic simultaneously. First of all, it leads to a good laugh, realizing this menacing terrorist cult used some weird chibi corporatist characters to depict its stories, but second of all, it can be read as a sign of budget constraints or as an aesthetic reflection of internal collapse. Once Asahara entered the dream, the protagonist no longer needs complexity, he no longer needs the world as it was, he only needs to submit and do as he is told, and every single dream of his will come true. Even the voice of his parents crying and seeing how proud they are feel like it's staged. They just say generically that they are so proud of their cult member's son. Their pride, their emotions, their reality are all irrelevant now because they come from outside the cult's constructed truth. When I watch this story, I don't see individual characters. I don't see any amount of joy. It comes directly from a tiring and burnt out self. It's all lies. You won't get no shiny car, you won't get no pretty wife if you're part of I see templates. Each life becomes interchangeable, useless, and indifferent from one another. That's an aspect that scares me the most, to be fair. People becoming identical, irreplaceable in their goals or aspirations, unmoving and unwavering from where they previously stood. Not motivated by themselves, but by someone above them to do his bidding. The motivations are always the same: pain, confusion, failure. The solution is always identical: yoga, meditation, asahara. The diary is a record of self-discovery in common belief, but here the protagonist uses it almost as a ledger of conversion. It is very much a book of doom. Entries are confessionals reframed into propaganda, propagated for more people to consume, to assume their life will become better if they punish themselves like this, to achieve utter happiness. It's all lies. And what makes it especially grotesque is the sense that this wasn't made by cynical propagandists trying to trick outsiders. It was likely made by people who genuinely believed they were being saved, that they had found the answer to their miserable existences. That honestly is the most frightening part, because it reveals the full extent of what was taken from them. Not just their families, their ambitions, or their futures, but their capacity to doubt, to question that what they were doing was morally wrong. Their capacity to think freely, their capacity to tell what is evil. So that's what I see here. Not theatrical, not loud, but precise, slow, methodical. The second story begins with a different person, also in high school. I think we can assume they're also around the age of 17, or maybe they're the same person. Look, the movie can be a tad confusing for someone who doesn't speak Japanese fluently. I'm doing my best, okay? Moving on. So whoever this person is, he describes a crushing sense of futility, anxiety born from relentless academic pressure, something not uncommon to many Japanese schools. Over there, a lot of people are familiar with the idea of examination hell. Young people face a high-stakes gauntlet of entrance exams that can determine their entire future for every step of the way. I think my country of Romania also has similar exams, but I'm sure they're by quite a fair margin less difficult than the ones presented here. Thing is, he says he felt weak, ashamed of wasting time on video games and fleeting pleasures, and we're shown that multiple times. This sort of echoes countless real students who internalize failure as a moral defect. I see here a profound existential void, something that does often occur in real-life cases. One's identity being tied entirely to exams leads to a sense of helplessness. Every moment spent outside study becomes guilt, every pastime a betrayal of duty. This is more than stress, it's ikuzurasa. An accurate translation in English for that would be a pain of living, a form of psychic suffering described by Rie Kido in one scientific article titled The Angst of Youth in Post-Industrial Japan, a narrative self-help approach. In that article, Rie mentions that it's one of the more prominent problems that the country faces, and is one as stemming from alienation with the hyper-competitive systems. In the movie, we can see this hyper-competitive system tumble down someone still in their teens, forcing them to commit suicide. After a long period of economic development, the country of Japan flourished in the 80s, but that didn't necessarily mean people were drawn away from emptiness, emotional numbness. People were in fact more than ever. Capitalism was in expansion after all. The fact that teenager attempted suicide should be a greater indicator of societal decline than any. His suicide attempt crystallizes that void, the void of guilt and sorrow. The breaking news is a terrifying happening, an utterly haunting metaphor. The mechanism meant to end his life fails, and in that failure he confronts the sheer absurdity of his condition, self-reflection in the purest form. Why were we made? Philosophers from Camus to Nietzsche argued that suicide is the ultimate question of existence. If life truly is meaningless, why endure its torment? What's even the point? Here the film stages that question literally, then refuses to answer it, abruptly shifting to exercise with his parents. The way he regained this refuting was like the one that came before, though exercise isn't joining the cult, so in truth it was no salvation. This jarring cut is just like the abrupt pivot cults offer from the burden of being at the center of the world. We move to esotericism and purpose, repeating actions which makes singular members better, from abyss to promise of structure, from nothingness to a system that claims to fill the void. And by refusing to dwell on the raw horror of his attempted death, the narrative sidesteps genuine reckoning and instead repackages his despair as the starting point for his spiritual rebirth. Home recruiters often targeted entire families, using one member's conversion to pressure relatives into joining, even if only to preserve harmony. The parents' encouragement of exercise and reading is presented as love, but it also primes the protagonist to accept external directives without question. I see the seeds of dependency being sown. I see the evil in the cult's face, because cults are just an absurd exaggeration of what we already do as a society. We oppress, coerce, control. And in this extension, he becomes yet another cog in the machine. He learns obedience to parental guidance, just as he later learns obedience to the guru. And by normalizing compliance within the family unit, the film subtly prepares us to view compliance to Asahara as neutral. In that sense, the parents become unwitting accomplices, modeling the very submission the cult demands. I personally see the cult's regimen as antithetical to Camus' Invincible Summer. In all this stuff, there's a presence of the myth of Sisyphus. Camus writes that, in the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. And I sort of feel like it portrays these people failing at seemingly mundane actions, getting overpowered from the inside. Life's absurd, but its lack of inherent meaning does not compel suicide, but instead can inspire rebellious affirmation of existence. But here it has the opposite effect in some regard. People are inspired to become samey and to aspire towards the same God. In the film, there's no rebellion after his attempt on his life. We don't see any change of heart, any embrace of life's inherent absurdity, because the film does not acknowledge the absurd. Where Camus would encourage personal revolt and creative freedom, demands total surrender. The film strips away the possibility of moral resistance, replacing it with the ritual submission masked as enlightenment, in a very, very complicated manner. It's tricking the audience too. In this story, I see the classic cult arc: despair, dramatic intervention, structured regimen, illusory transformation. The protagonist believes he has conquered nihilism, yet his peace emerges from a system that thrives on his deprivation, the absence of sleep or recreation. That pattern preys on vulnerability without offering a radical solution, then binds the seeker even tighter. This is what made so dangerous. It exploited the young people's existential pain and repurposed it into total devotion to Asahara's truth. As each story progresses, they all reach the same goal, and they do so in a complexing manner, trying to convert people by showing the effects the cult had on people's lives. But we as the audience know these stories aren't real. They are fictional imaginings of the lives of alleged members of the cult. In that way, they end up feeling rather shallow and, of course, manipulative. I don't think covering them any longer makes much sense, as nothing of note actually happens in any of them. Instead, I think talking about some of the other films/videos the cult made gives a better picture of some of the complexities and the length at which the cult went in order to try to appeal to as large as an audience as possible. The second animated film I could find on the subject isn't entirely animated and doesn't follow the anthology style the previous one had, instead being more of a documentary style video. It has tons of cuts done to live action footage, aerial shots, and real life figures, including extensive references to different branches of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity to some extent. The film opens like the one that came before, with a very bizarre invocation: Guru, a sure path to liberation, perfect savior, forever above my head. This time they aren't exactly title cards as much as they seem to be some sort of prayer. As they're shown on screen, the voice of a woman repeats them in a sort of prayer-like tone. Each of them appears to work like some sort of verbal sigil, tying the whole ordeal together before we've even begun. In religions like Buddhism or Hinduism, the guru, the one mentioned in the prayer, is a spiritual teacher, a bridge between samsara, the cycle of suffering, and moksha, liberation. But here as a cult doesn't really invoke the guru as a teacher because his scope is to conduct in some regard. He's a savior, omnipresent, an axis mundi. His role isn't to help you see it, is to see for you and tell you which one is the objective reality, the objective truth. What the cult does here is front-load its metaphysical position even before the film begins. It tries hard to instill a sense of tranquility through the picturesque footage of mountains and calming tone of the voice, but most importantly, it tries to instill the feeling of prayer within you. I'll take this opportunity to confront the idea of prayer, since it seems interesting to me. When I was younger, I used to be a highly religious person, perhaps because the schooling system in Romania enforced it on us, and the teachers were always telling us Bible stories which had interesting twists, at least to my 7 to 8-year-old brain. Whenever I would try to pray within that class. I felt a feeling unlike any other. I felt weakened, connected and tired at the same time. Nowadays, a lot of that a person like me can attribute to some sort of placebo effect, but it still lingers in the back of my mind. I could feel in this film right here trying to impose the same sort of feeling on its viewers, to make them feel the same way as in prayer. Thinking back on it, I think one author from my country went in depth into that idea, and his name is Maitreyi. To his book Maitreyi. In that book, he talks about a self-insert protagonist named Alan, who ends up visiting India in the early 1920s in order to further his studies and deepen their understanding of culture. The novel begins with the male character's state of uncertainty and lack of purpose in the grander scheme of things. Everything is written in first person, based on the author's notes taken during the 3 years he spent in India. The opening centers on the character's hesitation as he wishes he could remember the exact day he met Maitreyi. The journal, written in objective time, that is, in the real time of the events, causes an unwieldy effect where it provokes in the narrator character feelings of confusion and puzzlement, since when writing the novel, in subjective time the events no longer hold the same significance for him. The theme of love sits at the center of the novel, but the most powerful elements of it are represented by the mysticism and esoteric nature of India through its religious aspects. In the book, he says he feels drawn to India's mysticism, but his foreigner attitude leads to him not fully comprehending the intention of the people giving him a place to sleep. Alan's European mindset leads him to interpret their protective attitude as a sign encouraging marriage, when in fact they had embraced him in a different spiritual way, without crossing the boundaries imposed by their religion. While Maitreyi was a first venture into this sort of spiritual aspect, Eliade's writings would not stop there. People who pray, as I've said earlier, regardless of their religious background, often report a strange, difficult to articulate sensation that arises during deep moments of spiritual focus. It may feel like an overwhelming presence, a subtle shift in perception, or even the eerie impression of being watched. Often described as peaceful or profound, this feeling can also be tinged with unease. Though elusive, this sensation has been explored from various angles: theological, anthropological, psychological, and neurological. Among those who have studied it, I find Maitreyi's take on it provides one of the most intriguing lenses, and one that actually ties back to the video perfectly. Eliade, best known for his work, The Sacred and the Profane, argued that religious experience is marked by a rupture in the fabric of ordinary, profane times and space. In his view, moments of contact with the sacred are hierophanies, or eruptions of the divine into the mundane. These moments, induced by ritual or prayer, reorder a person's sense of reality. What is familiar becomes charged with meaning and becomes other. This matches closely with the uncanniness people feel in prayer, the change in environment made by the quiet room, which in prayer becomes a sacred space. Silence becomes presence, and so on and so forth. Eliade emphasized the ontological weight of sacred space because generally the symbolic or emotional proved to not be enough, but something being real in a pre-modern sense. In prayer, then, a person might be stepping into a different mode of existence altogether, one in which the world feels hyper-real or even disorientingly alive. This helps explain why prayer can be accompanied by a sense of both awe and anxiety. One is not merely thinking or speaking, but encountering something beyond human categories, which causes a sense of primal fear within humans. As such, we see prayer slowly turn into a coin with two sides that melts into a single amalgamous form. This dual feeling, the one of fascination and fear, was also described by German theologian Rudolf Otto, who coined the term numinous. In his 1917 book, The Idea of the Holy, Otto called this sensation mysterium tremendum et fascinatias, or a simultaneous experience of trembling awe and irresistible attraction towards the divine. Eliade's sacred space can be as such felt as numinous, loaded with an alien yet magnetic presence because he knows exactly what it feels like. Contemporary neuroscience offers complementary insights in a field known as neurotheology. Researchers such as Dr. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist at the University of Pennsylvania, have studied what happened in the brain during prayer and meditation using brain scans. Newberg observed reduced activity in the parietal lobes linked to spatial orientation and self-other boundaries, and increased activity in the frontal lobes associated with focus and intention. The neurological shift may explain the ego dissolution, time distortion, and feelings of presence often described during prayer. Psychologically, this state is something referred to as an oceanic boundlessness, a term used in studies of altered consciousness to describe feelings of ego loss and connection to the greater whole. Even Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, was intrigued by this sensation, though he interpreted it as regression to the infantile states of consciousness. He also wrote about the uncanny, where he described the eerie feeling of encountering something both familiar and alien, a description that also aligns with many mystical or prayer-induced experiences. So despite these feelings being multifaceted, I still think in the context of a cult they strive to create a feeling of unease. Not to force you directly, but to manipulate you to do as you're told. This is a technique often used in cult conditioning. Instead of defining your suffering, you are made to feel that it already exists, that it has always existed and that you've simply forgotten. The lack of it actually makes it more palpable. Feeling safe is what creates the dissonance from the self. It tells you you're lost, then offers a hand, but not one you can grasp immediately. You must journey, you must prove yourself worthy of it. This scene is followed by the prayer or title card called Soul Hometown Guru. Maybe that is the title of the movie, I'm unsure. This idea of a soul's hometown is intriguing because it implies exile instead of viewing it as a temporary location. This becomes your own soul's hometown. It reframes all of life, your career, your family, your body as foreign soil. Only the guru represents home. Visually, the scene is matched with scenes of the mountains and temples, but these are not shot reverently. All of them are long, wide shots with a concerning lack of movement. The cinematography doesn't slow down or explore their sacredness, it simply moves through them like checkpoints. At a rate that feels crawling, perhaps it wishes for you to take in the atmosphere yourself. It ends up feeling disingenuous or maybe purposeful. All the shots are disorienting and cause a powerful feeling of being lost. This terrain of fate isn't yours to traverse alone. You need a guide. Only the guru knows where to step. After the invocational opening, the film transitions into a symbolic animated sequence. We see a person walking into the sunset. After a few shots of them entering a storm, meeting death, and then the animated sequence ends to display fire. In many spiritual traditions, fire is both a purifier and destroyer, and I don't think it sort of sets up the visual element here for that journey of purification. Maybe the figure doesn't get purified by the encounter with death, and instead looking to getting a proper guide in the passage. He does not transform himself, he survives in order to become a vessel for something else. That something is the guru. This is when the story shifts again our attention to a completely different shot that offers its only quasi-salvic image. A bearded, possibly Buddhist figure, maybe it's Buddha himself to my eyes, it does not look so. But the depiction is ambiguous. This is not a radiating Buddha of peace and detachment, but a more vague and impersonal force, even slightly uncanny. He has a mustache, an oddly mundane human trait that makes him feel less divine and more historical or maybe more cultish. Is this really the Buddha or is it the guru posing as one? It is hard to say where the manipulation truly begins. It feels limitless yet scoped. By framing the guru as interchangeable with the Buddha, the film plays with the viewer's expectations, and so people might end up insulted by this. But it does so to erode this line between tradition and deviation, to call into question established religious authority. It makes Asahara's spiritual legitimacy that of the historical Buddha with its iconography. In other words, it hijacks the aesthetics of enlightenment to launder its ideology through the viewer's subconscious. To raise the walls of the individual is the ultimate goal of these works. The cult, and by extension Om Shrinko's eschatological purpose, depends on your depersonalization. To commit the you hold truth to the abyss and accept the gospel of these videos. The slow metamorphosis into a vessel for karma, a node in the guru's divine lymphic system. In your march towards the guru, the film enacts the loss of personal narrative. No longer do you have a self to redeem. The only thing that matters is the end. Death is inevitable, so there's nothing wrong with hastening it. Such are the teachings of Om Shinkyo. The next animation shows a family who, when its oldest son dies, holds a funeral ceremony in his honor. A deity, who looks strangely like Asahara Shoko, though he's not dubbed by him, observes the event and falls from the sky to question what the boy meant to them. And yet the family is there, apathetic and comparing the tragedy to a snake changing its skin. It was inevitable that the boy would die and meet a new self. Om Shrinkyo doesn't care about life, hence why it killed so many of its members. People will simply be reborn, whatever how painful their passing was. One thing is to move on fast, another is to not show any emotion at all, like the boy's family. They repeat over and over again how great he was, but never cry for him. The deity, Asahara Shoko, is more than satisfied. Called indifference. In the end, people are nothing more than assets. That's mostly what possesses most of the Om era of writing. That and the presence of the need for brainwashing. I've given 3 examples of this specific era, but I also think there's a few others. Strange examples, to say the least. There's one that's much more blatant about a boy being kidnapped by his parents and brainwashed, and the ones who save him are the cult body and Asahara himself. This one also portrays the main villains being the Om Shrinkyo Victims Association. A lot of it is gaslighting. I'm assuming this one was more likely to be shown to already existing members to keep them quiet and believing that what they were doing was right rather than to new ones. There's also this far stranger one that portrays Om's ideal world as a Gundam utopia. Everyone's dressed in these strange space uniforms. It's all treated like a joke, childish, innocent even. It's regression of the mind and soul. Every day and every minute of their lives was filled with propaganda. Even the movies they watched were made by the cult, and while all of this may appear indeed hilarious on the surface, from a cult member's perspective, these were their aspirings. This is just insane. There are also a few animations that portray the Alf era of the cult, and in a few of them, the at the time de facto cult leader Joyu Fumihiro voices some of the characters, like this one where he voices a monk. The story is quite simple for what it actually is. A man sees a monk cooking an animal, denounces it to the king, the monk is arrested, and it's later revealed he was just trying to cremate it. He dies in prison and lectures the king about virtue. In the second one I was able to find, made during the Aleph era, a man meditates in the mountains trying to contact Maitreyi, the future Buddha. He does it 3 times or so, but nothing happens. When he sees a dog being attacked and almost dying, with literal larvae on its paws, he enters a moral dilemma on whether or not to kill it. In the end, he keeps it alive, and Maitreyi, again dubbed by Joyu, appears before him saying he did the right thing. The second one also appears to be strange because it appears to go against classic Asahara belief, probably because of the leader at the time. He's known for saying that seemingly heinous actions shouldn't get misinterpreted, which is quite dubious even for Om. What's left after all this is something that no longer even resembles the propaganda it started as, but the residue of a broken theology trying to express itself through vivid imagery. The Gundam utopia, the heroic Asahara rescuing a brainwashed boy, the moral fables voiced by their own leader, all of these are attempts by collapsing fate to mythologize its own delusion. These works are not art. A true artist would never even think of making such vile works, such low effort. What you get is the myth of making art, presented as a coping mechanism. The creation of theology is denied escape and hidden under layers and layers. In that sense, the late Om and Alf productions belong to a tradition of art made by people who could no longer tell the difference between their simulated realities or their real lives. A kind of art of the broken mind. And even then, there's art made by the broken mind of an artist who wishes to create, and then there's this torturous purpose made by people who didn't want to do it in the first place, but were forced into it. I think back to someone like Vincent van Gogh, the classic and canonical figure of the mad artist. His hallucinations, manic episodes, and psychotic breaks are described in recollections of his life as somehow crucial to his work. Yet I am of the belief that that was never the case. Works like The Starry Night or Wheatfield with Crows can be read as projections of his internal turbulence, ecstatic pieces featuring luminous translations of suffering. Yet I assume Van Gogh would have still been a good artist without his pains. They didn't make him a better artist, they only made his life harder. It is true that real art comes from true emotion and suffering, but even then, people like Van Gogh created of their own volition. This is art made by fundamentally broken people. The sincerity of these works is the exact part that makes them terrifying. They aren't cynical, they're kind of like confessionals made for the cult to spread its roots deeper. They show us what happens when belief detaches from doubt and yearning for creation turns into nothing. The doctrine has not escaped the grasp, neither has every other act of creation which parodies itself as the reinforcement of a cage. In trying to sanctify everything, turned their own imagination into a torture device. And that I think is the truest horror of Om's media, of the films made by this horrifying cult. Not just that it was used to recruit or to brainwash, but that it exposes how easily art can become theology, and theology can become propaganda without ever losing the appearance of beauty to those untrained, to those who think less for themselves and take things as face value. What we're left with is some movies which reek of low quality and are excruciatingly boring for us. Movies that talk about the human desire to be consumed by something larger than ourselves. Whether that something may be, I don't know, God, ideology, or art itself. The danger lies in the surrender of the self to that aspect, in mistaking ecstasy of annihilation for transcendence and hiding yourself behind a mask, obeying the machine for yet another day. But who knows? Maybe these are just the ramblings of a madman talking about that time a cult made their own anime.